Before we do anything with numbers, we need to figure out which quadrant to draw this triangle in. So I'm going to draw off to the side here. I'm going to draw our little chart. All students take calculus. And we're going to figure out where these two things go. So this says that sine of theta is 3 over 4. The number isn't so important as the sign. It's a positive 3 over 4. So I'm going to highlight the quadrants where sine is positive. That would be in the first quadrant and in the second quadrant. Now I want to know where cosine is negative. So what I'm going to do first is think, where is cosine positive, and then I'll highlight the other two quadrants. So cosine would be positive here where the A is, and then where the C is, because the C stands for cosine. So now what I'm going to do is highlight the other two. So this one and this one. And then you can see that the one where they overlap is in quadrant 2. So that means that I'm going to draw my triangle in quadrant 2. So I know I'm going to draw a right triangle, so I'm going to draw my diagonal line going to the origin and then a vertical line going straight down, making a right angle with the x-axis. So now what I'm going to do is, and let me draw in theta here, is I need to label my sides using my numbers. Remember that sine is y over r, if you remember your ratios. So the y value means that it's this vertical distance here. So that vertical side is 3, and then r, which is our hypotenuse, is 4. So now I need to figure out what is my missing side. My missing side is the x value. So I'm going to use that, I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem. I'm not going to use our shortcut Pythagorean theorem. And the reason is because I'm not solving for r this time. So I'm going to do x squared, which is what I'm trying to find, plus y squared, which is 3, equals r squared, which is 4. So I have x squared plus 9 equals 16. If I subtract 9 from both sides, I would have x squared equals 7. And then if I take the square root on both sides, I would have x equals the square root of 7. Now, I just want to make mention, when we did quadratic equations and we would take the square root of both sides, we made a big deal about having to always write a plus or minus in front of the square root. The reason why we don't have to do that now is because we are trying to find a length. So it doesn't make sense for us to talk about a negative length because you can only have a positive length. So now I'm going to label this as the square root of 7. Now the next thing I'm going to do is go through and I want to label x, y, and r. I know we've been talking about them, but I want to actually have the labels. So this is x, y is 3, and then r is 4. And now on my where my grid is for my answers, I'm going to go through and write down my ratios. And again, these are things that you need to have committed to memory. So I'm just copying them down. Remember that these are all reciprocal, so if you can remember the first 3, all you have to know is that for the reciprocals, you just flip them upside down. All right, so final answers. So for sine, I would have y over r, so that would be 3 over 4. Okay, so that's my final answer there. For cosine, I need x over r. Oh, and there's one other thing I need to go back and fix. I didn't write down that our x value, even though we got positive square root 7 as our answer, because we're going to the left, I'm going to mark it as a negative. So that doesn't come up until just now. So my x is negative square root 7, and then my r is 4. So that's our final answer for cosine. And then for tangent, things are going to get a little bit tricky here. So I need y over x. So that would be 3 over negative root 7. But we can't leave the root 7. So we're going to have to rationalize the denominator. So what I'm going to do is multiply my fraction by the root 7 over root 7. And my final answer is going to be this negative that's on the bottom, I'm going to bring it out to the front. And then I'll have 3 root 7, 3 root 7. And then my denominator would just turn into 7. So my final answer for tangent would be negative 3 root 7 over 7. Now let's go over to our reciprocals. For cosecant, I'm just going to take 3 over 4 and flip it upside down. That's easy. For secant, I'm going to take my cosine answer and flip it upside down. The catch is that I have a denominator that's a radical. So we're going to have to rationalize. So I'm going to multiply by root 7 and root 7. So my final answer, this negative I'm just going to pop out to the front, will be 4 root 7 over 7. And then for cotangent, I don't want to flip the final answer. And the reason is because if I do that, I'm going to end up having to rationalize the denominator again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this answer right here, the first answer that I wrote in pink. If I take that answer and I flip it upside down, it becomes negative root 7 over 3. Now I don't have to rationalize anything. So if we had if we had flipped our final answer for tangent, we would end up with the same thing. This is just a lot less work.